What's up, everybody? This is Fred Richani of TSC News. I have right here via Skype a very special guest. MLW promoter, MLW Radio personality, and former WWE writer Court Bauer is on the line. He's here to talk about the very, very bumpy road to WrestleMania 31, as well as Walemania, Rey Mysterio finally free, and much, much more. Court, how's it going, man?
Hey, what's up, Fred? How's it going?
A little cold here in the Northeast, as you know all too well.
Oh, that's all it is. It's the new age ice age. I think we're going to have snow here melting in this 4th of July. I mean, it's just insane.
Now, you have some big plans for WrestleMania weekend, Santa Clara. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But the big news, which you've kind of been at the forefront of, is Rey Mysterio is finally free. Y'all finally freed Rey.
We did.
Can you just, I mean, obviously you can't go too much into detail because of whatever agreement Rey had with WWE, but can you just kind of give fans like the Cliff Notes version of kind of what's gone down with Rey and WWE over the last year and why it took so long for him to finally part ways?
Well, Rey for a while wasn't happy. He's been healthy for a long time, and he's been sitting it out on the sidelines and basically hadn't been booked for a while. And, you know, the clock is ticking. You only have so many years in your prime, and he was in his 30s just sitting on the sidelines, and it's very frustrating for anyone to go through that. Yet he was making big money for them in terms of merchandise, and yet they hadn't really found a new Mexican star. They had Alberto Del Rio. They squandered that opportunity with what went down last summer, and now Rey worked out an arrangement with WWE to leave the company, and that was something that worked for a little bit of time, but he's very happy now. He had an incredible week down in Mexico last week, and it was surreal for him to go back to Mexico City after 18 years of being away from AAA, to go back there, be welcomed with open arms, like a hero's welcome. Alberto Del Rio, Mysticis, the former Sin Cara, former Mystico, all there to do media with him. And I think he's got an incredible future in terms of projects and stuff. Beyond wrestling, we're looking to do some really cool stuff that we'll actually start dropping some of those bombs probably at the live session we do with him out in Santa Clara at Walemania. So that's going to be a big thing. In fact, possibly his first film project we'll probably be talking about at that event. Very
cool. And I think a lot of people don't realize just how big of a star Rey Mysterio is outside of the United States, outside of North America, in Mexico and everything,
right.
With the Latino community. And the guy was in quite a few commercials, even when he wasn't really used by WWE in recent years. So I think his prospects, and as you say, definitely look very good. How's he holding up health-wise as far as his knees go?
I was recently at his house, and he ran up the stairs faster than I could have run up the stairs. I mean, he's very nimble, is the best way to put it. For a guy, he did this stem cell injection, very experimental, and ever since doing that, he's felt like $1 million. I think with anyone like Rey, where you've put on, he started wrestling at 14, so he's put on a lot of years on the road doing a very dynamic, high impact style that can affect your knees and stuff. So you want to be very careful and selective with where you wrestle and how often you wrestle, but also who you wrestle. And so that's part of the game plan moving forward, is to make sure there's a lot of sensitivity to those things just to preserve his knees. He's feeling great though.
This might be a stupid question, but why the hell did WWE choose to not do anything with him even before they had this contract impasse? I mean, at least to me, from an outsider's perspective, I always felt like they kind of underappreciated the guy, despite the fact that he drew money and helped them expand in the Hispanic market.
He absolutely did draw money for them. They absolutely didn't understand how he fit into their equation, because fundamentally, Vince McMahon gravitates towards bigger guys. He always has since his early days taking over the WWF. He's always liked his top stars to be of a bigger, larger-than-life presentation. Rey is larger than life, but he just happens to be very small physically in terms of his size. So I was there, part of the process of WrestleMania 22 when he first was the idea was presented to introduce him as the world champion in a three-way with Kurt Angle, with Randy Orton, and Vince just wasn't really fundamentally cool with that kind of a concept. Philosophically, he was just on a different page, and it took a lot of work to get him to at least be open to the concept. And then, looking back, I even wonder if it was the right thing for Rey's career, because it was almost like Vince wanted to prove us wrong, and every week he'd take our ideas, use about a quarter of them, and then flip it, and where Rey gets devastated and physically ragdolled throughout his match. So yes, he was world champion, but it was such a poor presentation of a world champion that I think it did more harm than good in that run. And I think there are aspects of that philosophically that continue to linger for Vince in terms of how he presented Rey Mysterio after that fact. But you can't ignore the numbers in terms of what he did, not just in terms of merchandise. He sold a lot of merchandise. He also performed incredibly well in the ratings, not just Hispanics, not just kids, but you look at just across the spectrum. It doesn't matter what your ethnicity is, what your age is. He was really loved by, and is loved by, 6-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 22-year-olds, 32-year-olds, 42-year-olds, 52-year-olds. So it's like John Cena doesn't enjoy that broad of appeal. He has a very extreme fan base that skews young and female when it comes to the adult demo. But Rey was able to cross all boundaries, and that's very special. That's very unique, and he's had staying power. So he's also a generational guy that started, you could say if you were in Mexico, you started watching him in 1989 when he was 14 and maybe playing hooky from middle school or high school. But really, most people found him in the 90s, maybe during ECW or AAA when Worlds Collide. And then, of course, the Monday Night Wars, and then the next wave with WWE. So he's had so many waves of popularity and exposure in North America, worldwide, that you have multiple generations that are able to watch it. A father can watch Rey Mysterio with his son, and the father may have started watching Rey when he was, 19, 20. But Rey just turned 40, I believe. So it's like very young, all things considered.
Absolutely. And another interesting stat, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I've been told this by multiple people leading up to this interview because they knew I was going to ask you about Rey. And from what I understand, even though WWE kind of was pissed off at Rey for not wrestling much because of injuries and everything, in the last decade or so, he's actually wrestled more matches than Triple H and Undertaker. So,
right.
I don't know, double standard there?
Right. That's a really interesting point. That's a great stat. And Undertaker is a special attraction, and I believe Rey is a special attraction. He's the biggest small man, or however WWE presented him. And if a guy is, you have to protect him and make him special. And I'd submit to you look at the last 12 matches he's had in WWE. They're very forgettable because of how they presented him. In fact, you look at the Royal Rumble of 2014, and they presented him in the most shocking way.
Number 30, filling in for Daniel Bryan. I mean, my God.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, going into that, you had Rey Mysterio and Dave Bautista, two very hot guys. Dave Bautista, the Raw before Royal Rumble, was on fire. He was returning home with a hero's welcome again. And the way they booked that Rumble, and they denied you Daniel Bryan, you booed whoever they were going to put out there. You could put out anyone, and they would have booed them. And that was an indictment of the creative, not rejection of the talent, rejection of the creative, the booking. And but that just tells you how short-sighted and they just kind of disregarded what they had there. And you don't have really a new wave of Latin talent that's ready to pop up. You can say maybe Kalisto will be that, but he's an NXT. He's part of a tag team, and they don't seem to be grooming him for that. He's not. Apparently, they're just not going there yet. So they lost their here and now in Alberto. They lost a legend in the making with Rey Mysterio, all within a 6-8 month period. That's a mass Mexican exodus that if I was at WWE, I'd be like, guys, we got to work double hard to find the next big thing. We have to send guys down to Mexico. We got to send them to Tijuana. We got to send them to Mexico City, all the border towns. We got to find the next guy. And they really haven't been able to do that. I don't know if they have the wherewithal to do that. I don't know who would scout that guy.
Yeah, and I feel like just with WWE in general, even with the guys that they do, like, say, Roman Reigns, they're just not booking him very well. And I don't know if it's because Vince McMahon's out of touch. I don't know if he has the wrong people in his ear or what. But you look at Roman Reigns and how botched that push is, and he's clearly not ready. And look, WWE ain't going out of business tomorrow. They'll be fine, but it's still a bad look for the time being. And then when you talked about Rey Mysterio and how he's presented, and he wasn't really presented as a legend, I'll give you another example of a guy who they do actually like, Chris Jericho. I mean, the last couple of years, I mean, Chris Jericho's been marginalized to a guy that just, same type as the Bray Wyatts and everything, 50-50 booking, has a bunch of forgettable feuds. I mean, I was rewatching WrestleMania 29 the other day on the network. I mean, he lost to Fandango. I mean, I feel like that's kind of where that turning point was, and as far as his drawing power and his appeal. I don't know. I'm sorry. I was just going to ask you. I mean, I don't know how else I can word this. Is Vince McMahon out of touch?
I don't know if it's. Here's the thing about Vince. I've always found him to be a brilliant promoter, the best administrator that's ever been in terms of wrestling. Because look at his track record. He is an amazing, once in a lifetime, once in a century promoter. If we're lucky, I mean, he's really just the gold standard, and that somehow has been turned into him and in his own head being that he is a creative genius across the board in booking. Well, that's, if you look at his run, no matter when it really wasn't him at the helm of booking. It was Pat Patterson. It was the team of Jim Ross, Jim Cornette, Vince Russo, Ed Ferrara in the 90s, the late 90s. And you look at those periods, and he surrounded himself with very good people. And now Vince, I think, believes that he did it all. And there's one great quote that I've heard attributed to Grill Monsoon when he would talk with friends about Vince. It's, geez, if he pat himself on the back any harder, he'd break his arm, which is a great line. But I think if you really do believe you are great at this, and you don't really allow yourself to have that 26, 28 member creative team help you, and that's a lot of people. I don't think you need more than 2 or 3 people. But I mean, it's like you have all these resources, but you're at the helm, and he's a micromanager. I think there's a lot to be said about that because the buck stops with him. He will tell you that himself. So if there's a vote no confidence and talent, I mean, I look at the book in the last year or two. It's very short-sighted. It's very impulsive. It seems to change very quickly, and that is an indication to me of second guessing. You're second guessing yourself, and that's one of the biggest rules of bookers I was taught was never second guess yourself to the point where it's a constant. Because if you start second guessing yourself to that extreme, look at what you're going to have as a product, and look at his product. It's things change on a whim. Look at Roman Reigns, the guy who had a lot of mystique to him, ends up having an injury, which is actually a great thing. Let him go away and bring him back hot. No, they kept him on TV. He'd missed maybe a week here and there, but they had him doing promos, and it was like you're accentuating the worst weaknesses of a guy you could possibly accentuate. That took away from his mystique, and I think that hurt his mojo more than anything you could have done. And yet they continue to do it week after week. It was so patently obvious to me that was not what you should be doing. And I think everyone else that it was puzzling. It was just puzzling, but the buck stops with Vince McMahon.
How different is creative now compared to when you were there in the mid-2000s?
We did not have a home and away and an all-star team. That's relatively new compared to when I was there. There was more wrestling minds involved with the product. On my creative team, it was guys like Dusty Rhodes, Michael Hayes, Ted DiBiase. Then we had some alternating people come into the mix. Sometimes it would be Paul Heyman. So you had really vibrant wrestling minds across the spectrum, from Dusty Rhodes, who booked WCW, to Michael Hayes, who had a cup of coffee booking world class, but had been, part of Mid-South, world class, WCW, and Heyman, who booked ECW, and Ted DiBiase, who learned under the learning tree of Bill Watts. So you had a nice spectrum of different perspectives, all in the same age group, but very talented when it comes to a lot of experience and very well equipped to present creative. Now you don't really have that, and I think when you don't have wrestling logic discussed, considered within the creative process, that's a problem. And you can say, well, any fan can do that, or any writer can do that. Yes, but the little nuances, the things you pick up over 40, 30 years in the business, or just being in the wrestling ring, you can't discount that. You just can't. And that's something I think that it seems to be missing from the product today. And I think those guys also had the ability, not all, but some of them, to debate and engage Vince McMahon in a ballsy way. And I think there's something to be said about that. And at least playing devil's advocate, which maybe, takes him down a different road.
So why did they decide to make the change to go from that format to now having nearly 30 writers? I mean, you've worked on shows before.
Yeah.
Have you ever been a part of a show that had 30 writers? Is there ever a need for 30 writers?
I never heard of it. I can't say that I've, SNL has a lot of writers and stuff, but 30 for any series is, it's not what you'd want to do, especially when you're losing money on the network. It's something that doesn't seem cost effective. Vince, I think he said it on the Stone Cold podcast, believes it's something that is part of the evolution of his product, which to me is a cop out. I think it's a very broad answer.
I think it's devolved.
Yeah, I think it's just. I mean, I noticed it when I was leaving. It was just there was more bureaucracy. There was more layers and layers and layers of just people with titles, and I didn't understand why everyone was just getting new titles. And I'm like, this is so weird. I got a new title. Everyone's getting new titles. Like, what's it all mean? It doesn't mean anything. So, it's. I remember Jim Cornette was telling me a story when he was there. They were big on titles too, and he was part of the booking committee and all that good stuff in the '90s. And they had to adjust titles because someone got moved up, so everyone got bumped up because they were sensitive to the titles. And someone congratulated him on his new title. He wasn't even aware he had been promoted. He's like, "What do I get paid? Oh, you get paid the same. You just got a new title." It's like, okay, but WWE. I look at it and I equate it to a power hitter. They strike out a lot, but when they hit it out of the park. And that's the best analogy I have for WWE in the modern world that they live in. It's basically a power hitter. They swing for the fences, and sometimes it's a brutal whiff, and other times it's a brilliant home run.
Very well said. Now, you did promote Major League Wrestling for a number of years. Booked a lot of really great talent. Most notably, off the top of my head, Sanjay Dutt, Steve Corino. A young guy by the name of CM Punk, who's now trying to make his foray into the UFC. Later worked for WWE, and after that, you were kind of burned out. Seemed like you didn't want to be a part of the wrestling business anymore. Years later, you revived MLW as a sports and entertainment brand, a great podcasting brand as well. You're doing your thing in entertainment. You're promoting the shows with Jim Ross and Wale. What made you come back to pro wrestling? As I guess Michael Corleone once said, just when I thought I got out, they pull me back in.
Well, it started out, actually, I wasn't even involved. It was just our partner in crime on the podcast, Mr. St. Laurent, discussed doing a short series of podcasts with former MLW guys and just kind of do a limited edition podcast that runs, however many episodes there are to fill with ex-MLW guys. And I had at that time become friends with Conan, and I said, I know he wasn't part of MLW, but I think he would just make for great radio podcasting, so why don't we get him on? And I wasn't hosting the show or anything, but Conan said, hey man, when we do the show, would you mind being on, because I'm familiar with you and I think it will just go better. And I said, yeah, let's try it. And we never looked back. That was April of 2012, I think. And here we are, and we're coming up on our 3rd-year anniversary, and we're going to bring it in big style with a live session with Rey Mysterio out in Santa Clara WrestleMania weekend. So none of us anticipate doing a weekly podcast. I never would have thought of committing to something like that, and then it grew and grew into a family of podcasts with Jim Cornette having a weekly show and a VIP segment. We have the New Japan crew with the Bullet Club. They have their own podcasts on Saturdays. We have a writer's room with former WWE writers that come on and just talk shop and tell crazy stories from the road, or just talk and dissect WWE today. Kevin Sullivan has his own podcast on Fridays and talks about booking WCW and Florida Championship Wrestling and all the talent he had to work with and manipulate, ranging from Hulk Hogan all the way down to the cruisers. So it's a really interesting and diverse lineup. And I actually think a lot of the guys, I don't think Cornette's going to be there, but I think Kevin Sullivan's thinking about coming out for our event. And so it's we're going to have almost like a MLW family reunion out there in San Jose or Santa Clara. So we're really excited about it.
And you got some big plans in Santa Clara. Wale, the rapper, headlining Walemania. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, he's a friend, and he loves wrestling. He's like anyone out there. Like when it's good, he's freaking out and loving it. When it's bad, he's texting saying, "Man, what the hell were they thinking on that Raw?"
Or he's tweeting at Triple H. His million followers.
Yeah, and he's a diehard fan, but he's also a student of the game and really studies it. He reads everything. He's very locked in from a business level of enjoying wrestling, just like all of us. We love to talk the business as much of what goes on creatively. So yeah, we were talking about doing an event, and we're like, let's just, you got an album come out. He just had collaborated with Jerry Seinfeld on a new album called The Album About Nothing, and that drops on March 31st, the day after the Raw after WrestleMania. And I said, let's do kind of like an album release party, and we'll do a live MLW session with Rey Mysterio with a fan Q&A where the fans can ask him questions that are in the house. We'll do a VIP style meet and greet with Rey where you get an autograph and picture. And we ended up getting that sponsored by Don Julio Tequila. So you get complimentary tequila as you kick it with Rey and get your picture. That will be fun. That's a pre-show thing. And then there's a Vegas style after party with Rey and friends where Wale will perform. So it's just like it's like our own podcast WrestleMania, I guess, with the fans. So we'll be all hanging out there at Taste Nightclub in Santa Clara, and the night will start with wrestling and end with some rap. So it's a rap and wrestling connection, like the rock and wrestling connection from back in the day.
I dig it, man. And some people would say that's a hell of a deal.
Exactly. Maybe even Kevin Sullivan or Disco Inferno, who actually I think Disco might be making it out, which is I've never met him, so I'm looking forward to it.
How did Disco Inferno get involved with MLW? Now, he's a friend. I met him once at an indie show a couple years back. I interviewed him, and we've been Facebook friends for a long time. He's an interesting dude. On one hand, he's actually a lot smarter than people give him credit for. On the other hand, he gets off on just trolling the hell out of people, most recently Matt Hardy. What's it like working with Disco?
Yep. I've enjoyed it. I've actually only talked to him a few times. He usually does podcast with some of the other guys, but I've enjoyed just talking to him off the air and on the air. Never, like I said, met him, but really intelligent guy. But I think he loves playing the heel and trolling people online, especially. And now I guess he's got this ongoing feud with Matt Hardy and Matt Hardy followers on Twitter, which is from the outside looking very entertaining. And who knows? Maybe they'll end up squaring off very soon in the ring. I don't know.
Hey, would make sense to me. Now, before I let you go, man, I asked a few fans if they could submit some questions. You got some time for some quick hits?
Let's do it.
All right. Court, I know you were a promoter with MLW. Obviously, you worked in WWE. Do you have any crazy promoter stories that were either passed down to you or ones that you experienced yourself? I guess maybe the craziest, if you could narrow it down.
Oh, man, the craziest? I wasn't there for this. I was staying at another hotel, but all the talent for MLW was staying at one hotel. And I actually found this out because someone sent me a link on a message board, and then I asked some of the parties involved if this was true, like a half a decade after the fact, and it was. But I guess there was one time a major party going on at the hotel down in Florida, and Candido and I think Sonny were walking around naked trying to find their room. And I mean, I am so glad. And then someone, I don't know if it was Raven was passed out in a hotel lobby chair or something. I am so glad I stayed at another hotel and that someone shielded me from knowing anything about those events until years after the company had folded, because I would have been probably furious and probably would have been the end of the line for all parties involved. But yeah, that's one of them. And then there's always I've told the story before, but the Vince story about racing is a good one, in that we're leaving the Harbor Yard out in Bridgeport, the arena, which now has been named, I don't remember, it's got some sort of sponsorship deal with the company, but we were leaving after a Raw, and Vince loves to compete. Obviously, he loves competition, and no joke, he had in fact pulled up next to me right as we're going on the ramp. There's a light, 2-lane that would merge into one that goes to 95 going southbound, and revved his car, looked at me, and I knew exactly what that universal sign was about. He wanted to race. Now, he had a Bentley Sports Coupe. I had a Mercedes, and I was like, well, let's see what happens here. And so we get on the highway, we're gunning it, man. And I'm like, this is like one of those things, I know this is insane. I'd never have done this in my life before. We'll never do it again, but it's a story that I'll never forget. And we're racing, and they were doing like overnight construction on 95 right south of Bridgeport, seemingly forever at this point in time. And the left lane was closed, and I was in the left lane. And he wouldn't let me over.
Oh, man.
And he just looked at me and just gave me the finger. And I'm like, oh, fuck. And I had to slow down because I think that man would just been happy to see me just go right into the construction kaboom. But that's the aggressive nature of Vince McMahon, how competitive he is, but also fun. I mean, he was playful and all that stuff. But again, a once-in-a-lifetime guy. And you can say a lot of positive, a lot of negative about him. But he's kind of like what animation had in Walt Disney in the 40s and 50s. That's Vince McMahon in wrestling. I mean, this guy redefined something. He created a business that just didn't exist. It was a very antiquated business until he got into it and got into licensing, got into taking this thing nationally, then globally, and never looking back. And, creatively, you can say he really doesn't have that kind of skill set maybe, but I think for the most part, it's obvious for the most part what he's contributed versus what he lacks. It's amazing. And think of all the promoters have been, how many have had longevity, let alone made the money he has. And I'm not saying that because I want a job or anything, because I never will go back there and have no interest, no appetite for it. But you've got to look at it straight up. He is a once-in-a-lifetime guy. Like Dana White is in a lot of ways, I believe, as an operator at UFC. Look at where MMA and UFC was before Zuffa got into the picture in 2004 or whatever it was. Totally different animal. And look at them where they've gone today on Fox. They're mainstream, essentially. There's a lot to be said about that. And so you have a once-in-a-lifetime guy, and I hope one day he writes a book. I don't think Vince can write a book because his long-term memory is atrocious. We once had a conversation when we were looking at doing something with Bret Hart about the Montreal Screwjob, and he could not remember how it went down. He was completely honest. He wasn't doing it to just play, like kayfabe us or anything. Like he was baffled. He could not remember. So of course, certain people took credit that had no clue what was going on. I told you how to do that finish, Vince. Remember? Bruce Pritchard or someone would say, and like, dude, that's totally, in the end, I was like, I need to know. I had to go on my own quote unquote WWE investigation, like they do nowadays, apparently a lot. Yeah. But I remember asking, it was like, Jerry Briscoe, who was an amazing collegiate wrestler and shooter in his own right, obviously I think had a hand in that. But yeah, I mean, again, Vince McMahon just on a different level than any other promoter. There's been a lot of pretenders to the throne, but it's been his throne more or less for the last 35 years.
And you mentioned Dana White, and of course Dana White's right-hand man, or vice versa, is Lorenzo Fertitta, who I think is a brilliant businessman in his own right. And we actually got a number of questions regarding Vince's right-hand man, Kevin Dunn. Now, I'm not asking you to bury anybody or anything. I'm just asking for your honest opinion. Is Kevin Dunn as bad as people say he is? Or does he have his strengths, his weaknesses, much like Vince?
Listen, if you talk to someone that's worked for him, they will say he's the best because the morale there is fantastic. The TV studio, which is the division essentially in Stamford that he oversees, his castle in the kingdom, the culture there, people love it. The energy there is awesome. People go overtime and go overboard. They have so much pride in their work. He is a very, very talented leader at his job. Now, if you're in another division, he's a fucking pain in the ass. There's no other way to put it. He's the thorn in your side. Sometimes he can agree with you on things. Other times he might undercut you. We were supposed to do an exploding death match like you saw in FMW back in the day where they had the ring literally explode with a plume of smoke and all that stuff. We were supposed to do that for in 2006. And that turned into the Punjabi prison match because we gave him the concept that Vince had signed off on. He didn't allow us access to any of the creative or anything involving it until like a week out when it was already built. Money was already sunk into a bamboo death match or whatever that cage was. And, that was nothing like what we were supposed to have. But, so he's not one or the other. He's a little bit of both, and it depends on the circumstances and when you work with him and who was working for him. And but again, you go into that TV production studio, and the morale there is exceptional. There's arcade games, so if you want to blow off steam, need 15 minutes to clear your head, you've been sitting in front of an editing bay all day, you go and play an arcade game, and it's an awesome, there's popcorn. It's a real fun TV environment, whereas corporate is very corporate. And I always felt the creative team should have been in that building because the energy is more akin to what you want out of a creative or writing room than the corporate end, where we literally had to lock the doors going in and out of the writing room. There was no windows. It was you were cut off from the outside world. In fact, if you looked up the creative division within WWE in their directory, we didn't exist because they were they wanted to keep it kayfabe to that level, which was so funny to me because the company was radically different in terms of their presentation of it being a work in the general public. So it was like all of a sudden we're like part of the NSA or something because of that. But it's just the company in general is a walking contradiction. It's just you have to accept that.
Yeah, and it's weird. I remember a couple years ago reading about how the writers weren't even invited to the WrestleMania after party, which just I don't know if that's true or not, but that's
just rude.
Yeah, that's just shocking. I mean, look. For every Court Bauer and Andrew Goldstein, Alex Greenfield, there are guys that obviously don't necessarily know what they're doing. But a lot of guys there do work hard. It is a thankless job. The turnover rate's astronomical. And they don't get invited to the WrestleMania after party? I mean, don't you think they should, be a little bit more welcoming to these writers? I mean, come on, man. They're always dealing with Vince McMahon and changing his mind. Just mind boggles me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what started that. I have a feeling someone embarrassed themselves, like unbearably so, and they had to, there was just you had to do it. That's typically what happens. Did that happen? And that caused it, I guess. But I was there. It was a different time. I don't know. It was a simpler time, I guess. It was a fucked up time, but I think they overthink things across the board at WWE, and that's one of the things they overthought. It just that's not good for morale too. But I don't think they've ever really been concerned about the writers and the creative team's morale, which I think you should always consider everyone's morale in every division. I don't care if it's accounting, legal, hospitality, whatever division of whatever company. You should always be sensitive to that because that's part of your company.
Speaking of overthinking, just on a side note, I think they're definitely overthinking this whole Randy Orton Seth Rollins thing. I mean, my God, it was tailor-made. Just have him come back, kick ass. You do the match, you could have Jon Stewart in Randy Orton's corner, and instead he's doing this whole thing where he's trying to destroy the authority within. I mean, what is this trend of guys breaking up and then not really breaking up? And then teaming back together and then breaking up again? I mean, we saw it with Adam Rose and the Bunny. We've seen it with Miz and Mizdow. Why can't they just go through with things? Why half-ass it?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think they are overthinking things. I also think they're second-guessing themselves. Sometimes Vince, instead of taking the most logical, linear path for a storyline, will try to take a detour or encourage you to come up with concepts for a detour. And sometimes that works. Sometimes it's what you get on TV right now with Randy Orton.
Of course. All right, and last fan question here before I ask you about everything you're doing with Jim Ross. I know you said you don't want to promote anymore and do creative, but if your boy Conan hit you up, would you think about joining Lucha Underground?
I guess you never say never, as I've learned in the business. They have a very talented team. One of my good friends, Chris DeJoseph, is overseeing the creative, and Chris Roach, who works with him as well. Both were guys at WWE Creative when I was there, and actually Chris worked with me on the Strike Force stuff that we did that never saw the light of day because UFC bought Strike Force and created a Cold War scenario with Showtime. But I've been out to their tapings and stuff and have enjoyed seeing what I've seen of their product. I really think they have something that's different. It's right now a boutique product. Can they take it to a larger level? Well, that's where guys like Alberto Del Rio and possibly a Rey Mysterio, if he were to ink with them, that's where they come into play. You need a few stars to move that needle to get you to a higher level, both with potential broadcast partners, licensing partners, and the audience, and mainstream media. And I think those kind of guys are those good gets. You don't want to fill your roster with a bunch of ex-WWE guys because it becomes TNA too. But I think if you're selective I think guys like Alberto, guys like Rey fit into that equation very nicely. But I really like the energy of the Temple. It's if you're out in LA or you're out that way, or you go take a trip out there, check it out. They really take care of the fans. Really, 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 really do a great job of doing that. And in general, it's just a real fun experience. It's a light, quick experience. You're there for like 2-3 hours, and they tape 2 shows, and they have music playing, and it's just a festive environment. And it's like an ECW arena type vibe, but it's a much nicer version. It's a warehouse, yes, but it's been retrofitted with all this brilliantly high-end production equipment, and it's an awesome energy to that like 600 or 500 seat building. And I think there's a lot of magic that is yet to happen at that building. I think there's a lot of potential for the brand, for the league. I just really hope that they can get onto a larger platform, or that El Rey Network can expand into more homes, because that's what it's all about. And that's their glass ceiling now. They're handcuffed by that. So hopefully in the near future they can make moves to broaden their exposure. Even if they're on Apple TV, they're on Xbox, PlayStation, or they do something like the first season's available on Netflix, those kind of things can help a little bit. Now, are they game changers? No. The big one is getting probably a bigger partner in broadcasting, or El Rey being able to cut a deal where they're essentially in maybe 2 to 3 times the amount of households they're in right now, which they're trying. I mean, they're on Dish Network. They just started that. They're almost about 75. I think they average about 75,000 viewers. I'd love to see them go higher, and I think they can. I think they have that potential, but we'll see. It's a good time to be a wrestling fan, because there's so many options out there. You have New Japan on Access, you have Lucha Underground, you have TNA on Friday nights, you have WWE, you have NXT, and then if you go online, you can watch anything at any point. I watch AAA on YouTube. They put up their own stuff on YouTube, and it's awesome. So you can watch anything. And then there's the WWE Network, where you can watch all the old stuff if you're not down with the new stuff.
And there's a ton of great indies out there. I mean, locally here we have, Pro Wrestling Syndicate. Tommy Dreamer just had an awesome show with the House of Hardcore, and it's not just an ECW retread, but you got guys like the Young Bucks and Bobby Roode, and of course Rey Mysterio made a surprise appearance there. I mean, it is a good time to be a fan, but it would be nice, especially for a product like Lucha Underground that I feel like is so different and could be, with the right distribution, so revolutionary. It would be nice if they got that bigger distribution platform. I mean, if you really think about it, they've kind of reinvented the wheel, so to speak, for the first time since, say, maybe WCW back in '95 with Nitro.
Yeah, well, I look at a lot of different things happening now. It's just a fascinating time, because Lucha Underground has a unique style, a unique presentation to their product. Very much a guerrilla style, lo-fi product in certain ways, but hi-fi in other ways, and see how they do it in post-production. And you look at NXT, and it's essentially become a brand split from the WWE main roster, where you have these 2 isolated rosters, except for guys like Tyson and maybe 1 or 2 other guys like Cesaro coming over here and there. But that's essentially become a new brand split. They present the product differently. It's produced by someone that's not Kevin Dunn. It's got a different creative team. It's not overseen by Vince McMahon. It is the most purest brand split they've ever done, and it's something that's happened right under our nose. We haven't even really noticed it, but it's truly what it is. They're about to start touring. They did Ohio this past weekend. And it's a different style of product in a certain way. Very much a throwback. It's easy to fall into. They have exceptional talent. And WWE is still the biggest dog around. They're almost like McDonald's in that it's easy to find. It's affordable. It's around, it's every night almost on TV now, and it's still yet hard to digest. So, I mean, there is that. But there's a lot of variety right now, and that's a great thing. We have more variety now than we've had ever.
Oh yeah, and there's going to be a variety of entertainment in Santa Clara WrestleMania weekend. Not only are you involved in the aforementioned Walemania, but you're also the producer of Jim Ross's one-man shows, and I understand he's got a big show coming up that weekend as well. Can you tell us about it?
Yes, he's doing his famous one-man show. We did last year's WrestleMania at New Orleans, and it was an awesome time. We had Jim Cornette out there. Steve Austin came out there. I have no idea yet who we're going to do or what we're going to do this year, if we do anything at all. But Jim's shows are a one-of-a-kind show. You have a guy that was at a senior executive level who, when WWE was on the brink of bankruptcy, got real aggressive in recruiting talent. Like we were talking about earlier with Rey Mysterio, you need to find the next Rey or the next Alberto or the next Latin star. JR did that, 95, 96. He aggressively recruited. And over the next 5, 6 years, not just helped take WWE from the brink of bankruptcy, but set up their future, a future that we see today, this very day, with guys like Cena, Orton, Brock Lesnar, all guys he recruited, he helped bring along to the point where they became what they became. But you look back in his infancy, it was Stone Cold, or his infancy. You look back at 95, 96 when he started doing that, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Triple H, Dwayne Johnson, Mankind. Those guys were the basically the Mount Rushmore of the Attitude Era. And so, he is one of the architects for what would become WWE's ascension and rebound from, getting their ass kicked by WCW. And there's also the Mid-South years, and there's the WCW years. There's just so many years. 40 years in the business. There's an unbelievable amount of stories that he can share. And you were at the show in New Jersey recently. You can even speak to what the experience was like. It was a fun, very, off the cuff experience, and then there's a fan Q&A as well.
Yeah, I and I'm not just saying this because you're on the air and I'm having Jim next week, but my God, it was awesome. Great time. It was kind of a last minute thing. I had work and I got some time off. I was like, all right, let's go to the show. Called a buddy of mine, drove to Sayreville at the Starland Ballroom. It was just awesome. It was very intimate, personal, off the cuff, very funny. It ranged from hilarious to informative to downright inspirational, with him talking about how he overcame, his Bell's palsy attacks and getting fired by Vince McMahon. And the biggest thing, I'd say, if you're a fan, is just how personable Jim Ross was, not just on stage, but afterwards, taking photos of fans, talking to them, shaking hands, and of course the special guest, which at that time was X-Pac. I'm not sure who your special guest, if you're going to have one, is going to be in Santa Clara, but I'm sure it's going to be a lot of fun, tons of surprises. I cannot recommend it enough. It's a great experience.
Yeah, it really is. It's a great experience, and it's a fun time. And there's stuff you'll learn about Jim you had no idea, and maybe it's too much information, but he really does an awesome job. And definitely check it out. That's Saturday, and we have it budgeted so the show starts at 1, it ends at 3, so you have plenty of time to get to the Hall of Fame later that day, and it's just down the road. So 2 can't miss situations right there.
Oh yeah. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed this interview. Court, I want to thank you so much for your time. If you want to find out more info about Court Bauer, everything going on that he's involved with, MLW, the big WrestleMania weekend festivities, visit MLW.com. You can follow him on Twitter at Court Bauer, at MLW. Of course, if you want to buy tickets to Walemania, check it out, see what it's all about. Walemania.com. Anywhere else, my man?
That's it. Walemania.com, WALEMANIA.com, or MLWlive.com, or go to theticketgroup.com. Just search Rey Mysterio or Walemania or MLW Radio. And I'll see everyone out there. Santa Clara, Thursday night, March 26th. Starts with a pre-show meet and greet with Rey Mysterio, and then we go deep into the night, which will be amazing. I've already talked to a lot of guys, possibly some WWE guys unofficially stopping by. So it's going to be an amazing landing party for a WrestleMania weekend.
Very cool, very cool. And just on a quick side note, not only is this March 9, 2015 that we're recording the anniversary of Notorious B.I.G.'s death, R.I.P., but it is John Pollock's birthday, your co-host on Bauer Pollock MLW. So happy birthday to John Pollock, who does a great job for MLW.
Absolutely. I've already gotten 4 Facebook notifications telling me that it's his birthday today, so I don't know if he's sending them out or spending money on Facebook so everyone knows it's his birthday, but I have to give him some shit on that when I see him next.
Definitely, man. Well, Court, thank you so much for your time, brother. Appreciate it.
Hey, anytime. Good talking to you, Fred.
Thanks, man.